All right, quick question before anything else. You're driving, brakes are gone. Ahead of you, 5 people on the track, no way to stop. But there's a side path. 1 person standing there instead of 5. You've got the wheel in your hand. What do you do? Most people say the same thing without even thinking twice. Turn the wheel. 5 lives beat 1 life. Simple math. Except it's never actually that simple. And by the end of this, you're going to see exactly why your own moral compass might be less consistent than you think. So here's where it gets interesting. Same setup, different angle. Now you're not driving anything. You're standing on a bridge, looking down at that same runaway trolley heading for 5 workers. Next to you, there's a man, big guy, leaning on the railing. You could shove him. He'd fall, land right on the track, stop the trolley with his own body. Same outcome. 1 dies, 5 live. Would you push him? Almost nobody says yes to that one. Same math, same result. 1 for 5. But something in you refuses. And that gap right there between turning a wheel and pushing a man with your own hands, that gap is where most of moral philosophy actually lives. See, there's 2 ways people tend to reason through right and wrong. One way says, look at what happens, look at the outcome. If turning the wheel saves 4 more lives than it costs, that's the right call. End of story. Doesn't matter how it feels, numbers don't lie. That's usually called consequentialism, and the guy who built the whole framework around it, Jeremy Bentham, back in the 1700s, he had a pretty blunt way of putting it. He said humans are ruled by exactly 2 things, pain and pleasure. So the moral thing to do, always, is whatever creates the most happiness and the least suffering for the most people. Greatest good for the greatest number. Sounds clean, sounds almost mathematical. But then you hit the bridge, and the fat man. And the math stays identical, 1 life for 5. Yet something in your gut says no, don't touch him. That's the other way of reasoning showing up. The idea that some acts are just wrong, period, no matter what good comes out the other side. Doesn't matter if the ending improves. Killing someone with your own hands to save others isn't the same as watching a tragedy unfold that you redirected. There's a name for that, too. Categorical reasoning. And its most famous defender, Immanuel Kant, basically argued that people aren't tools you get to use for a better outcome. A person is an end, not a means to somebody else's math problem. Now let me tell you about something that actually happened. Not a hypothetical. A real case, 1880-something. A small yacht called the Mignonette, sailing the South Atlantic. Storm hits, ship goes down. 4 men make it into a lifeboat. The captain, Dudley, the mate, Stevens, a sailor named Brooks, and a 17-year-old cabin boy, an orphan, named Richard Parker. No food, 2 cans of turnips between them, and eventually nothing at all. 19 days pass. The boy is dying anyway, weak, drifting in and out, having drunk seawater against everyone's warning. And on that 19th day, the captain makes a decision. No ship in sight, no food left. He kills the boy with a knife, so the other 3 can eat and survive long enough to be rescued. They were. 4 days later, a ship found them, and when they got back to England, they were arrested for murder. So here's the actual question. Not what would you have done starving in that boat. The question is, if you're on the jury deciding their fate afterward, safe on dry land, well-fed, clear-headed, do you convict them? Because the case for letting them go practically writes itself. 3 lives against 1. The boy had no family waiting on him. The other 3 had wives, kids, people counting on them coming home. If you're doing Bentham's math, adding up total human welfare, the calculation almost defends itself. And yet, something refuses that logic too. Because if 3 lives against 1 justifies it, what stops that number from creeping up? 30 against 1, 300 against 1. At what number does taking an innocent life with your own hands become acceptable? And who decided that number? Some people try to fix this with an idea like consent. What if they'd drawn straws first? What if the boy himself had agreed to it, known the risk going in, said yes before it happened? Does that change the morality of the act? A lot of people feel like it should. Suddenly it's not murder, it's sacrifice, chosen rather than stolen. But then you have to ask why agreement changes the ethics of taking a life at all. What exactly does consent do that makes an otherwise unthinkable act permissible? None of these questions have a clean answer. That's not a flaw in the exercise. That's actually the entire point. Every one of us walks around carrying some blend of both instincts. The part of you that adds up outcomes like Bentham, and the part of you that draws a hard line like Kant and refuses to cross it, no matter the math. You probably don't notice which one is steering until a moment forces your hand. A real decision, something with weight to it. A layoff where you have to choose who keeps their job. A relationship where telling the truth will hurt someone, but a lie would protect them. Moments smaller than a lifeboat, but built from the exact same architecture. The old Stoics actually circled this same territory, just from a different angle. They weren't obsessed with calculating outcomes or drawing absolute lines. Their whole focus was somewhere else entirely, on what's actually yours to control, in the moment the decision lands on you, and what simply isn't. Maybe that's the quieter answer sitting underneath all of this. You will face moments where the math is ugly and the principle feels impossible to hold on to cleanly. What you can actually own is not the outcome, and not some perfect universal rule. What you can own is whether you showed up to the decision honestly, thought it through instead of flinching away from it, and lived with what you chose afterward without lying to yourself about it. That's really the whole exercise, not landing on a tidy answer to satisfy your own conscience by tomorrow morning. It's learning to sit with a question long enough that you actually understand what you believe, instead of just reacting on instinct and calling it a conclusion. If wrestling with questions like this is something you enjoy, this is exactly the kind of thing we dig into here. The channel's called Stoic Point. Subscribe so the next hard question finds you when you're ready to actually sit with it.